There we go.
Participants. So the attendees, Director Roche is in the attendee.
I just moved over.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. So we are going to go ahead and resume our executive committee meeting of Wednesday, February 5th. We just finished closed session item number, agenda item number 5, and we have nothing to report. And as those of you who were here early remember, we were waiting on agenda item number 2 for Member Gonzalez to join us. He has now joined us and was present for the closed session. So we are going to now call agenda item number 2, which is the chair and vice chair appointments for this body, the executive committee. And I will turn it over to Howard at this time.
Typically, this is an agenda item that's really managed via the board members. So I think the process typically would be to see if there are any nominations that board members would like to make. Director Marquez?
Yes, thank you. Can I be recognized, Chair?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to nominate Director Anderson as the Chair of the Executive Committee, and Vice Chair position, I'd like to nominate Director Gonzalez.
I'll second. Wonderful. The motion is made to.
Do you accept the nomination?
I do, thank you. Yes, I do accept the nomination with honor.
As do I, with honor.
Great, so I'll move it.
I'll second.
You get a call
Okay.
roll.
Great.
So
Thank
now we
you.
have a roll call vote.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Oh, public.
Yes.
We are going to call for public comment, to see if there's any public comment on the pending nomination.
There are no hands raised at this time.
Okay, let's go ahead and have a closed public comment and have a roll call vote.
Thank you very much. Alameda County,
Aye.
Hayward,
Yes.
San Leandro,
Aye.
Piedmont.
Aye.
Motion is approved.
Great, thank you so much. That's really, it's an honor to be a part of this board, and I look forward to serving as chair of this executive committee. Okay, moving on to agenda item number 7, which is approval of the minutes from January 8th, 2025. Do we have any comments or questions from my fellow members on the minutes?
Nope.
Seeing no comments, do we have any public comment?
There are no hands raised.
Okay, closing public comment.
Move the item. I
Member,
move the item.
we have a motion from Member Gonzalez. Do we have a second?
Second, Marquez.
Member Marquez,
Second.
second, thank you. Okay, roll call vote, please.
Thank you. Alameda County,
Aye.
Hayward,
Aye.
San Leandro.
Aye.
Piedmont.
Aye.
Minutes are approved.
Okay, moving on to agenda number 8, mid-year budget update. This is an informational item. We are going to review the budget performance through December 2024. This agenda item will be brought to the full board at the next meeting. Is that correct?
Correct, yeah.
Okay, so this is our opportunity to hear the presentation and ask any questions.
Great. If you can keep the presentation, I'm going to try to move through this fairly quickly, both because we're short on time and because we are going to cover this with the full board as well in just a couple of weeks. So we typically do a mid-year budget update. In this case, we have a couple of meaningful changes. Adrian, you can go to the next slide, please. So on slide 2 of the presentation, quick reminder, fiscal year July 1 through June 30th. We're in the mid-year cycle. We've got actuals through November of 2024. We've got pretty good estimates for December, and then January through June are full estimates.
Move the box, please.
Let me see.
Just a drag.
What it is covering is it says to the right of June budget, it just says mid-year update, and to the right of that says Delta.
No, thank you.
So what we have here, I'll comment on the big changes. It's really on the top line. So total operating revenue has increased significantly. You can see by about $57 million, increasing from a forecast of $870 million to $930 million. You can see cost of energy is is also slightly up from $772 million to $787 million. So up about $15 million. So it's a partial offset of that increase in revenue. The other numbers tend to be smaller movement numbers, both in terms of overhead operating expenses, about $6 million down, and that's mostly due to slower personnel hiring, and a little bit on the consultant spend front as well. And then the last thing of note is total non-operating revenue is up, mostly driven by higher interest rates. So the net of that is we're seeing a budget surplus of about $95 million versus an original budget forecast of $42 million. So that's an increase of about $53 million. That's all generally good news. It puts us in stronger financial position. And we'll talk a little bit more about those details. So next slide, Adrian. So here are the biggest drivers. We'll start on the top line side, so the revenue side of things. What this shows is on the sort of left side of this line graph, you can see the blue line and the sort of orange line. The blue line is our actuals and the orange line is our budget. So we are modestly below our budget from a revenue perspective for the first half of the year. That's primarily driven by slightly lower rates. So it's mostly in line, but slightly below, and that's just how rates actualize from the time that we had our budget presented. You can see on the right side of that line graph, the sort of light blue, which is a little hard to make out, and then the orange line is our updated forecast relative budget, and that's where you can see it sort of inverts there. In our forecast right now is quite a bit above our budgeted levels. Overall, for the year, we're projecting will be about 6% higher than expected. Expected being our budget. The back half is up about 19%, and the first half is down about 4%, and that averages out to about 6% because the first half of the year is a heavier revenue, heavier load year because it captures more of the summer months. So that's that. You can go to the next slide. So that's what's driving it, higher revenues. What's driving that? Higher rates, unfortunately, than what we're budgeted at least. So what we have on the right side is a bar graph kind of showing the changes over time. So the leftmost bar shows our budget for the July through December 2024 period. The blue portion of that is our rates. The orange portion is PCIA, the power charge and difference adjustment. Just to the right of that are actuals. So you can see just slightly below what budget was. So that's why our revenues came in modestly below our budget. And then on the right side of that, you can see net impact to customers of the change in rates in terms of how they actualize was really neutral, was flat. So the third from the left bar is our January through June budget, and then the last bar to the right is our January through June actuals. So when you combine PCIA and rates, that's what our customers are paying for generation costs. You can see that's pretty flat. But what you see is PCIA went from a larger portion to a smaller portion, and therefore our rates actually increased, materially, and that's what's leading to higher revenues coming in. Why is that happening? The increase in PCI is driven by lower ground power costs, but that's offset by higher resource adequacy and higher RPS as well. This dynamic, I'll just note, that's a dynamic of how we set rates. It increases our headroom to operate, and it's a reflection of higher energy costs, and gives us more operating headroom to serve our customers. We will talk a little bit more about this in the February full board meeting on our rate setting methodology, how it's indexed at PG and how PCI plays into that. So just flagging that as a mid-year agenda topic for the future. Next slide, Adrian. Now over to costs. As noted earlier in the slide, our costs did also increase. It was a partial offset to the increase in revenues, and that's because we have historical hedges that are in the money. But what you can see here is a breakdown of the various category of energy products that we use to hedge. The two notable differences between budget and actuals are for capacity or resource adequacy, where we actually came in lower than budgeted. And this is mostly driven to selling RA because we were not serving Stockton in 2024. That was deferred into 2025 due to some CPUC decisions. So we were long RA in part because of that and because of a load forecasting methodology by the CEC that establishes the RA obligations. So that also came in lower, which led to a more significant long position and therefore an ability to sell some of that capacity, even though capacity prices are actually higher than what had been forecasted a year ago. And then renewables, that's the bigger factor for us. That's driving the higher costs. So you can see the blue bars in actuals or joint being budget, and there being a differential there. Next slide, Adrian. So slides 6 and 7 are talking a little bit about power charge and difference adjustment and some uncertainty on the horizon. So overall, we have more operating headroom. It's a good financial position for Ava Community Energy. That's generally good news. With that said, there's some uncertainty on the horizon related to the power charge and difference adjustment that could be retroactive and actually claw some of that back. There are some public statements noted in various proceedings. Specifically in the second bullet, it says the commission may in another proceeding consider revisions to the market price benchmark, the MPB methodology that may impact the adopted 2025 final MPBs. So what we're talking about there are year to year, we look at market price benchmarks for different energy products, brown power energy, RPS, and resource adequacy. That all feeds into how you calculate the PCIA. And so as prices increase overall, PCIA actually goes down as a factor as it relates to these MPBs. There's a very detailed methodology for how to calculate these MPBs, how you aggregate market data, pricing information from various load serving entities to set those MPBs, and therefore how you take those MPBs and then determine a PCIA as well. And what the CPUC has indicated is a potential to revisit those methodologies and therefore not just reestablish how the PCI will be calculated in future periods, but also actually have some retroactive aspect looking back into 2025 period. So all this is to say is there's uncertainty on that, and therefore there's uncertainty as to what our budget will look like and how it will actualize. And even if it does actualize in the manner that we forecasted by the end of the fiscal year, there's a potential for a proceeding to work its way through beyond that period, which would leave us with some uncertainty. There's no action I'm requesting at this time, but I am flagging this. This is unusual, and therefore I may come forward with a recommendation to the board in the future as numbers actualize to adjust our waterfall treatment so that we don't say increase our unbilled credits or our reserve allocation if there's uncertainty as to whether we'll actually retain any budget surplus that may come from this. So more to come. There has not been any formal proceeding that's been opened up by the CPUC as of yet. But if it is, we would imagine it soon because it will take the better part of a year to actually run through that proceeding because I would anticipate they'll want to do that before the end of the year to go into effect in 2026. Otherwise, it would potentially get deferred even further, which would be very somewhat uncertain and chaotic from a rate setting perspective. Next slide, Adrian. This is just a little bit more on the mechanics, and we showed in the table to the right sort of an indication of what we're talking about when we refer to market price benchmarks. So this is just looking at RA as an example. So in 2023, RA pricing for the year was at $14.37. In 2024, it almost doubled to $28.26. The forecast for 2025 is at $40.31. So that's what's leading to this type of volatility and variability in the PCIA and what's actualizing at. And these NPV numbers are what the CPUC is considering discussing to see if there's an adjustment in methodology. I'll leave it at that because there's not a lot more information to provide in terms of how they may adjust that and the likelihood of that. But we do anticipate there to be a proceeding, some discussion given what was indicated in the prior slide. Next slide, Adrian. 2 more slides. These will be quick. We just wanted to show what the surplus waterfall looks like if numbers actualize as they've been forecasted at this stage. Overall balance for budget surplus about $95 million. What was board approved in June was an initial allocation of $50 million to reserves. Then a tier going to a $25 on-bill credit for Carefera medical baseline customers. That amounts to about $5 million, you can see there. Next would be a split between on-bill credits, the net billing tariff program, the solar storage incentive program is another way we sort of call that. So it would be a split between those two programs where $25 million would go towards those two programs, 60% towards on-bill credits, 40% towards the incentive program. And so that would leave about $30 million. Oh, sorry, that totals $30 million. That would leave about $15 million that would then be added to reserves. That's what totals the 60, close to $65 million in that bottom row there. So again, not asking for any action now, but to the extent we see significant risk on this, we may ask for an adjustment of the waterfall to preserve some of that, for some retroactive rate making, which is not a term that I use lightly. That's not something that typically happens. And then the last slide, Adrian, that's just a little bit more on the reserve policy itself, and just to show you where our reserve balances are currently at and what it would look like if we were to add that $65 million. So our current balance is $331 million. If you add the 65, you get to $396 million approximately. Column to the right is the forecasted annual operating expenses, and the last column is the percentage. So you can see, despite adding significant amount there, actually our percentage comes down a little bit, and that's just because we're increasing our load due to expansion to Stockton, Lathrop, and in the future San Joaquin County as well. And that is the last slide.
Okay, thank you so much for that presentation. Do we have any questions from our members?
Couple of quick questions.
Yeah. Member Gonzalez.
I just want to make sure that I think I wrote something down. So what I wrote was PCIA shrinking due to falling price of brown power.
It's so there, if you can actually bring back that slide 4, the last bullet on that slide says the increase in rates and decrease in PCIA is driven by lower brown power costs and higher RA and RPS. So that is a true statement, but the higher RA and RPS more than offsets the lower brown power. So you didn't write it incorrectly, but there's a greater offsetting factor too. So overall energy costs are increasing. The subcomponents are where brown power is actually going down a little bit and RA and RPS are going up.
That makes sense. Because it didn't make sense.
Yeah.
Stranded asset cost recovery, is this 20 years from today, 15 years left, 45 years, like what?
How long will this persist?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what the PCIA is to do, and it's the 20-ish time horizons, because these are all long-term PPAs that they carry.
Okay. And then are we planning to, or have we considered, how's that considered? Doing testimony at those PCIA hearings?
We are very actively engaged with that with our regulatory team. Todd Evans serving that process. Yeah.
Thank you. All my questions, sure.
Great. Any other questions?
Just on, we've just dabbled around in the past about untethering from PG&E rates. Is there anything about this budget update that would inform that or consider that maybe being an option?
There's important information here that sort of speaks to some of that, and I will just note that in the February meeting, we'll have a separate agendized item specifically on our rate setting methodology. I think that's to the benefit of new board members to really understand what that is, and also to revisit this concept of what does it mean to index to PG, what are the benefits of that, and what would it mean if we were to untether from them. And so that will be a good forum to discuss that a little further. And we'll talk about the pros and cons of doing that and what it means for our customers in terms of generation cost certainty when you look at PCIA and the fact that PCIA rises and falls, and why indexing to PG&E has certain benefits, because if you're using that in terms of risk management, how it actually balances some of the impact to the customers. Because on that slide 4, one indication I'll just make is when you look at that January through June period, the impact of the customers is flat. Our operating headroom changes, but the impact to customers is flat. So to the extent you untethered from PG&E, our costs may come in the same, but PCI may go up or down. So you can, in some ways, by doing that, you can create more volatility in customer generation costs. So this is something that I'll throw out there, and we'll have some more data and graphs to sort of show that in the February board meeting, but I want to just note that in response to your question.
That was a good question.
Great, that's neat. I'll look forward to that.
Any other questions? Okay, I had a question.
I have a,
Right, yes,
okay.
Member Gonzalez, go ahead.
Thank you. With respect to expanding
Marcus.
to San Joaquin,
Go ahead.
with respect to expanding to San Joaquin County, are all of those costs already captured in this budget in terms of purchasing renewable energy, staff, capacity building? That's all being already memorialized in this budget?
It's not entirely. What we've accounted for is serving Stockton and Lathrop, which will start serving in April. So when you look at our fiscal year budget, it's actually only a fairly short period of time of April, May, June that we're serving Stockton and Lathrop. And so it's next fiscal year that we will do a full year of service to Stockton and Lathrop. And then, of course, for unincorporated San Joaquin County, we won't be serving them a full fiscal year. The full next fiscal year. It will be for the majority of calendar year 26, though we haven't established a formal launch date for them yet. So once again, we'll kind of have this period where we're looking at just a partial year of serving a certain pretty significant jurisdiction. What I'll note is in the budget itself, it's actually a fairly small load that we're carrying related to Stockton and Lathrop. But if you look at the last slide in the deck where we've showed the operating expenses, the $1 billion of in the last line of that chart, that reflects a full year of Stockton and Lathrop, correct, Jason?
Yes.
But still a partial year of San Joaquin County.
Correct.
Yeah. So that's where it's tricky. And when you look at in the context of us expanding our geography and expanding our load, it's really important that you look at our operating expenditures on a forward-looking basis and consider that for what our reserve target needs are. And I'll just flag that in about 2 months, we're gonna bring forward an item to the full board related to our reserve policy. Talk a little bit about that, look at what that forecast looks like and what are our longer term plans to allocate towards reserves and meeting our target further out, since it's been sort of a year-to-year process thus far. And I think having longer term visibility would help to inform the board as to what's the plan here in terms of reserves, especially given our expansion.
Correct. Yeah, I'm curious to know what that target percentage should be, what's best practice within CCAs. And then I think you mentioned within the operational costs that it's been a bit of a slower process with hiring. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I would say this is not, this is sort of a by design. So the way we budget is we typically account for a 4 years salary and wages for staffing. And that's something that we know in the budget. So it is a conservative approach to our salary and wages line item in our budget. And obviously in no cases are we bringing in somebody to start on July 1 of the fiscal year. It's always spread throughout the year. So it's not necessarily an indication of challenging hiring environment or anything like that. It's just by nature of the way we kind of budget. With that said, it's generally a tight market. And so obviously we do spend time obviously doing recruitment and seeking the right fit and talent for our organization. So, it's not to say that it's an easy process either.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
I just wanted to piggyback on what Member Marquez was asking with respect to the reserve policy. I know going forward, there is quite a bit of uncertainty at the federal level. And I'll be curious when we do talk about the reserve, how much of how we need to save is dependent on uncertainty in kind of federal policy.
Yeah.
So that's just.
Okay, good flag, and we'll speak to that potentially in the reserve policy, but also potentially in other items as
Other
well.
items.
Just we're seeing some of those risks come about.
That's right.
Yeah.
Risk mitigation. So we have another question here.
Just one last question. I just want to button up. I think this conversation around operating expenses. So I see $826 million. And on the last page, I see $1 billion something. What I think you're telling me is that the actual what we anticipate the year ending up with as of June 30th, 2025 will be approximately 826 million. But if San Joaquin had been running for a full year, we would have expected costs of $1 billion something.
That's mostly correct. So Stockton and Lathrop are the jurisdictions, when you look at $1 billion, close to $1 billion, 1.1 billion, that assumes full year service to Stockton and Lathrop. I assume it also includes some portion of serving unincorporated San Joaquin County, or?
Correct.
Yeah.
The April start time.
Okay, so it is a forecast for our operating expenditures for the 25 to 26 fiscal year. So all of Stockton and Lathrop, portion of unincorporated San Joaquin County.
Thank you.
Okay, so this agenda item number 8, we turn now to public comment. Do we have any members of the public who want to comment on this agenda item?
There are no hands raised this time.
Okay, public comment is closed. Any other comments or clarifying questions from my colleagues? Okay, we are going to close agenda item number 8 and move on to agenda item number 9. With the time check that it is 4:19, and I do understand that we have a member, Marquez has to leave at 4:30. So hopefully we can get through that in this time.
Absolutely. I'll do this, and Joni here can help jump in to clarify any questions, but I'll try to keep this really brief. So in the news recently, if you're following the clean energy sector news, big news around a large fire at Moss Landing, which is one of the largest battery facilities in the country, if not the world. But I think the whole unit is about 750 megawatts. There was a large fire in the phase 1 portion, which is a 300 megawatt battery. So concerning, and has sparked some dialogue and discussion in the California energy markets, and concerns particularly around counties and such, with authorities having jurisdiction approving permitting, looking at fire safety, and I think some jurisdictions have even considered short-term moratoriums just to revisit some of the permitting standards and the fire standards associated with that. So we pulled together a few slides just to speak to that issue, to make sure that the facts were accurate. And we understood the risk, and whether it was outsized and how we can manage that risk. So this slide is just kind of talking a little bit about the design aspects. The Moss Landing battery specifically was designed a little differently. So it's a large indoor enclosure. There's minimal fire barriers, and it was with an older battery chemistry, acronym NMB, which is lithium nickel manganese cobalt oxide. It's more prone to thermal runaway, and newer chemistries are less prone, and newer designs and standards also mitigate some of the exposure throughout a larger battery installation that may occur. And phase 1 of this project was constructed before what's referenced here is NFPA 855. That's the National Fire Protection Association, I believe. Okay, I'm getting a good head nod there, 855. So those are new standards that speak to better designs and such, and this project predated those designs. Next slide. So a little bit on the current standards. So those standards I just referenced, they were released in April of 2020, and they were further updated in August of 2028. Those speak to higher levels of testing, firewalls, spacing, and other mitigations at the site and emergency response planning. And it sort of speaks to sort of how these are containerized. So you can see sort of dedicated, or they speak to sort of dedicated HVAC units, smoke and gas fire alarms, fire suppression systems, and those are all sort of separate in each of these containerized units. And we've shown this a couple of pictures to sort of illustrate what those look like. So those new standards help to mitigate any of the exposure related to fires and fire spreading. And then the point around battery chemistry is that the newer chemistries, lithium iron phosphate, LFP, an acronym, that's a more common chemistry today, and it has it's more stable, so lower probability or risk of thermal runaway. So those two elements combined really de-risk batteries, and are important to understand the context of the Moss Landing fire and what is being done today. Next slide, please. Couple more slides and we'll speak to what are we seeing? How is that the case? And what are we seeing within our portfolio? So this slide is California wide. This is taken directly from the CEC website, really actually great website that really shows you all the different battery installations across the different sectors, resi, commercial, utility. Over 13,000 megawatts of energy storage has come online as of the end of 2024. That's great. That's a data point that we've celebrated. It has improved reliability. It's clean. It's allowed for greater adoption of solar within California. It's been necessary, and so we point to that as a big success. A lot of that has come more recently. Obviously, newer technologies, new applications of battery technology are critical. And when you deploy new technologies, there's always risk in early stage deployments. The good news is over 94% of that utility scale battery capacity that's come online has been in 2021 or later. So that's after the NFPA 855 standards were released. I think there's still a little more verification to understand what counties are doing county to county in terms of following the NFPA standards. There are other guidelines related like international fire codes and standards. And so there could be a little bit of a mix across the counties and a mix, California as opposed to other states. So certainly there's more investigation happening both at the Moss Landing fire. And I think there's more diligence, obviously, that counties are doing in California and elsewhere to really understand the risks. So I'm not going to go to and say there's no risk, but the data really points to actually this is a pretty de-risked issue and a unique issue that occurred at the Moss Landing site. Next slide, Adrian. Slide 5. So this is on Ava's contracted batteries. We, of course, look into our portfolio to understand the risk. We have 19 storage sites, which is over a gigawatt of nameplate. 7 projects are in operations, 12 are under development. All of ours are outdoor stationary containers, about 2 megawatts each. Again, you can see a nice illustration of that. That is one of our projects, the Scarlet Solar and Storage Project. All of it's been permitted after the NFPA 855 was released. 16 are of the newer battery chemistry. 3 are the older vintage NMB. And we are looking into, what is the safety review of those sites? I know Joni has been directly contacting some of our developers and asset owners to understand what is the risk here, what were the standards that were followed. And I can say one of the projects that we've done, which is a pilot 10 megawatt project, was of the earlier vintage, and that's actually been offline revisiting those fire standards. And that predated any of the Moss Landing stuff. So in some sense, that's a good thing. You want your projects obviously to be online, but you also want things to be preemptive in terms of looking at some of those risks. And I think that's a for us, obviously that was a good thing to see that within the portfolio and see the benefits of contracting an earlier stage project to get it out there and operational, but also doing one that's smaller and at more of a pilot phase. Next slide, and this is the last slide. This is an eye chart, but this is just to detail those various projects, the size, locations, and when they came online. But that was all summarized in the prior slide. So that is it at
Okay.
record speed.
Well, I appreciate this agenda item, as we collectively make the transition to carbon-free energy, safety is always top of mind. And certainly our thoughts and concerns go out to the community of Moss Landing, the staff, the residents, everyone in Monterey County and surrounding area impacted by this fire. It seems like a pretty significant occurrence that happened. So I appreciate the update and the information and knowing that where we're headed is safer, hopefully, than where we've been. And, if there's anything we can do as an agency to support the folks affected, please do let us know that. I'm assuming there's a CCA in that area, but if there's any way to kind of partner and be supportive, I'm sure you'll let us know. Are there any questions from my colleagues on this topic?
No, just thanks for preempting the concerns, about what our homes in this area are. So that's a great update.
And I'll just add, it's really important that we're quick to get these facts out there, because you can imagine misinformation can also oftentimes be used there to speak to sort of risks and challenges in certain technologies. And in particular for our board members who really are more engaged on this in some ways than we are as authorities having jurisdiction to approve permits and such, particularly at a county level with you, Director Marquez, to make sure that we're hearing from different counties throughout the state of wanting to reevaluate this risk. And of course, that's important. That diligence needs to be done, and that, of course, would need to be done in collaboration, partnership with the fire departments and such. But we want to do our best to help inform our board of elected officials that are also dealing with this perhaps even more directly than us in some ways, to make sure that the right information's out there.
Do we have any public comment on this agenda item?
There are no hands raised at this time.
Okay, any other comments or questions from my colleagues? No, okay. That was an informational item, so that item is closed, and we are moving now on to agenda item number 10, committee member and staff announcements, including any request to place items on future executive committee agendas. Do we have any announcements, any future agenda items this time?
I have one
Oh.
announcement.
Okay.
I would just like to introduce our new CFO, Russell Mills. He goes by Rusty. He joins us from SMUD. He just started yesterday.
Just yesterday.
Really excited to introduce him to this group and obviously to the full board later this month. But welcome, Rusty.
Thank you. Actually, public power, so it's a background, but similar community engagement.
Wonderful, welcome. Welcome, thank you so much. I don't think we typically do public comment on that agenda item. So the next agenda item is adjournment. So I'm gonna go ahead and adjourn.
Betsy, sorry, I wanted to ask one quick thing about future agenda items. I was just curious, I think, Howard, we talked a little bit about when we did the, the day in Sacramento, but I am interested in the data centers that are coming in all over now. We talked briefly about it. I just don't know what that impact really is going to be on all of us. I mean, we're going to be dealing with it. I think we talked a little bit about sort of just like, PR around nuclear. I'm just wondering if that's something we should talk about at some point.
Happy to agendize an item there. What I'll say is that we are looking at sort of strategically looking at how do you attract some of that load into the territory. It's really important that we're looking at sort of the affordability of electricity costs, because that's part of attracting some of that load, whether it's data center load or green hydrogen related load or other things, or just electrification as a whole, of course. And so we do often talk about how do we ensure that we're driving down costs and providing an electricity product that attracts that type of load. And data center is one big factor there. We all obviously hear about that and the growth of that sector a lot. And so we're looking at that, we're evaluating that, we're thinking about where that could come out. And certainly we invite dialogue amongst our city members, as you may be directly engaged with different customers, commercial entities within your territory that may be looking to deploy data centers or other load for that matter that we would like to know about so we can plan for. Let me think about how we could agendize a topic on that and what would be useful from a discussion standpoint. And I'd love to talk to you maybe one-on-one just to know what may be of interest on your end.
Sure. Yeah, and if it's not a big interest to Ava right now, then maybe that is something we can just talk about offline, but I'm just sort of curious how it affects the renewable energy, area in general.
Yeah,
Okay.
certainly it's all over the press. It's all over the press. So I do think it's something
Yeah.
that our constituents are asking about. So thank you for that. Any other future agenda items? No? Okay. Our next executive committee meeting will be held on Wednesday, March 5th, 2025 at 3 p.m. And this meeting is now adjourned at
Thanks, everyone.
4:31. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
There we go.
1 minute late.